Norwegian by birth, and to take it from there. Yes. So I wish you welcome to an interview situation in the office of the Royal Norwegian Society of Sciences and Letters, Det Kongelige Norske Vitenskapers Selskap. We are now sitting in the building which was first built by the society in the 1860s and which has been taken over by the university, NTNU. Now, a year ago, the society established a global research prize called the Gunnerus Sustainability Award, commemorating the founding father, Johan Ernst Gunnerus. He was the first renowned natural scientist in Norway, and it just so happens that his field was botany, and he wrote Norway's first Flora Norvegica, published in the 1760s. And when we had been through all the procedures on finding the world's most worthy candidate for the Gunnerus Sustainability Award, it happened also to be a botanist. He is Distinguished Professor of Biology at University of Massachusetts, Kamal S, Bawa, sitting in front of me here today. And 2 days ago, he received the award of 1 million Norwegian crowns, paid by the local bank, Sparebank 1 Midt-Norge. Well, I would like to have a discussion with you now, Kamal for short, Kamal Bawa, about your work and more of your history and your background at the end. Before that, in fact, I would like to quote from the committee report, because it says a lot about you and you can comment. Let me read some statements from the scientific committee. Kamal Bawa's early research on population biology and tropical forest trees done in Central America revolutionized our thinking regarding the ecology and evolution of forest trees, and thereby directly enhanced our ability to conserve tropical forests. His discoveries of unusual breeding systems, novel pollination mechanisms, and a diverse array of flowering patterns in tropical forest trees changed the prevailing notions about the population biology, ecology, and evolution of these trees. And I could read a lot more, but I think we'll get more back to details later. So, Kamal Bawa, could you, to begin directly with your research, could you explain your method and your experiences from your work in Central America to begin with?
Yes, it was a very fascinating time. That period was early 1970s, when a lot of us in different parts of the world were trying to understand the structure and function of tropical rainforests. And my work dealt with the reproduction of forest trees in tropical rainforests. And at that time, the prevailing view, or one of the prevailing views, was that tropical forest trees are largely self-pollinated. They are largely inbred, because in tropical forests we have this situation, there are many, many different species. So individuals of a given species are very widely spaced, and people thought that pollinators could not move between these trees that can occur sometimes as far apart as 1 or 2 kilometers from each other. So it was presumed by many that the trees might be self-pollinated. What I was able to show was that these trees are not self-pollinated, they are obligatorily cross-pollinated, that they will not set seeds if they are self-pollinator. So that means that pollinators are moving over very long distances in tropical forests to bring about cross-pollination. And that was a very important finding, because that also meant that breeding populations of forest trees occur over very, very large distances. So in order to conserve forests, we have to conserve very, very large areas.
Okay, it may be obvious to you, but it not to me. I'm a physicist. What are the pollinators?
That's a very good question. And then again, we started looking at pollinators. What are these animals that move around over long distances? And one characteristic of tropical rainforests is that there are a wide variety of animals involved in pollination. There are bats, and there are birds, and there are a wide variety of insects, bees, and moths primarily. Beetles also play a very important role. So there is a very large array of pollinators. Another noteworthy feature is that in the temperate forests, most of the trees are pollinated by wind. One could say that about 70 or 80% of temperate zone trees are pollinated by wind. But in tropics, almost 95% of the trees, or even more than that, are pollinated by animals. So we have these different classes of pollinators, and it might appear that, well, certainly bats can move over very long distances, and bats are known to forage over distances of 15, 20 kilometers in a single night. But we found that even bees, howsoever small they might look, they also can cover a very, very large distance. And we, in fact, experimentally demonstrated that bees can move over very long distances. This again was a very pioneer work. We would go to the trees, we will capture bees in very large numbers, we will mark the trees with that fluorescent dye, and then a couple of hours later, we will go to different distances in the forest, and we will recapture the bees, and we will see if the bees we have marked at one particular location have traveled that far. And we found that over a very short period of time, bees can cover very, very long distances.
Well, I understand you have been working with great precision. And but my next question is, the canopy of the trees are high up in the air, and how did you get there? Did you have to climb up?
Fortunately, unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, I enjoyed working in these trees, which are very tall. I tried to climb the trees and found that that was not very efficient all the time, because it takes time to climb the trees, and in any given day I had to experimentally treat flowers of a very large number of trees. So I used various devices. I used very large ladders. I built platforms on the top of Land Rovers, and on that platform I will build a very large, I will put a very large step ladder. I will go to the topmost rung of the ladder, pull the branch down with a very long pole. So I was able to reach the canopy, but later on I found some people who were very good in climbing trees. And in fact, some of those people who worked with me as my associates went on to become leaders in canopy science.
It sounded like risky business to me. You were a young man then when you did that, right?
That's right, and that I survived is the proof that it is risky but not that dangerous.
Yes. Okay, so of course there were many aspects of your work, and it was mentioned by the committee also that your group was among the first to use what they call simple DNA sequence repeats to study gene flow in tropical trees. Could you explain briefly
Right.
what this is?
So you see, we were able to demonstrate that these pollinators are moving over very long distances, and to bring about cross-pollination. But then we wanted to go into more detail in terms of what is the genetic structure of these populations. We wanted to demonstrate, again, I think you mentioned precision earlier. We wanted to be more precise, as scientists always want to be. And we started using genetic markers to find out if we identify a particular genotype, how far it is dispersing its genes. Because the pollinators might visit that tree and go very far, but they may not carry its pollen that far. So we identified these genetic markers and traced the movement of the genetic markers, and again we found that trees are dispersing their genes over a very long distance, and then furthermore we found that many of these populations of tropical rainforest trees harbor a lot of genetic variation within their populations.
Good, thank you. Let me quote again from the committee. Later in his career, Kamal Bawa used insights gained from population biology of tropical forest trees to design strategies for sustainable use of forest resources, as well as conservation of large tropical landscapes. Could you comment on that?
I think once it became obvious that populations of rainforest trees occur over very large areas, we started to shift our focus to what one might call landscape ecology. We started to use remote sensing imagery to look at what are the patterns of deforestation, what are the drivers of deforestation. Similarly, on the ground, my focus at that particular time was shifting to India, where a very large number of trees are used as non-timber forest products. People collect a lot of different products, seeds, fruits, leaves, bark, for using for a wide variety of purposes, for their own livelihoods and also for commercial trade. And we used our insights into the population biology of trees to determine what would be the effect of collection of, say, for example, large number of seeds and fruits on the reproduction of these trees and the future potential of the population.
So you were into using the forest at the same time as you conserve it.
Right. And let me elaborate, because this is a very important point. For example, some of the work we did again in forests in India demonstrated, we built very elaborate population models that, all right, how many seeds a tree is producing, what proportion of those seeds go on to form next generation of seedlings, how many of those seedlings survive to saplings, how many of those saplings become adult trees, and what would be the effect of collection of seeds by local populations for their own use, that is, people. And what we found was that surprisingly, even if you collect 70–80% of the seeds, it doesn't have much effect on the population recruitment for the next generation. What is important, more important, is the role of fire in the population dynamics of this tree species, the role of other disturbances, say invasive species. But the Forest Department policy was focused merely on the collection of seeds by the local populations. And I think that type of work really helps us understand what is really determining the fate of these populations, because population growth of trees in a forest is subject to a lot of drivers, and we simply cannot focus on one. and ignore others.
Could I ask you, of course, there are various views on the, let's say, knowledge residing in indigenous people. So how is the meeting between those two cultures, so to speak, and was there something you could learn from the indigenous people?
Again, I think that's a very important point. And again, in our work, we have found that we learn a great deal from people in understanding, say, even the topic we are discussing, that is dynamics of forests, dynamics of population of tree species in a tropical forest. In this case, we were told by people, for example, that forest fires actually play a very critical role in maintenance of tree populations. Now, this might sound somewhat contradictory to what I have said earlier, that forest fires can also kill. Local people had a very interesting perspective on this particular issue. They said that forest fires very early in the spring is very low intensity fire and it is good for the forest. But what has happened more recently is that the forest officials have tried to suppress fires, and this builds up fuel loads. So when the forest fires now occur, they occur with a great intensity, and those are very harmful to the forest. So they, in a way, have a better knowledge about the dynamics of the fire than the so-called forest managers with all their training.
This reminds me of the situation in the US, which I'm sure you are very much aware of, because there's, of course, a discussion whether you should let the fires go, but you have observation towers where they look for the fires, but the question is, should you kill the fires or should you let it go? Could you comment on that?
Absolutely. I think it all depends upon the timing of the fire, the intensity of the fire, of course, the duration of the fire. It also depends upon what type of forest we are dealing with. Where it's a rainforest or in the case of tropics, whether it's a dry forest or whether it's a moist forest. Dry forests all over the tropics have evolved in response to a certain frequency of fire. And to suppress fire in dry forests without really understanding the true dynamics is a mistake.
Kamal Bawa, when I stress the forest aspect of your research, it is, of course, because this has been your main field, but also, as you are aware of, Norway is an international maybe leader in the struggle to maintain rainforests. And so I find it particularly interesting to hear your views in this area. Now, I thought we could move on now to the great work you have done back in India, where you established the Ashoka+ for Research in Ecology and Environment. The acronym is A3. It is located in Bangalore, and you have told us that you started with $15,000 and established this institution with that amount of money and your own knowledge and enthusiasm and endurance. You overcame all difficulties, and it is now an institution with over 20 faculty members, and it is Asia's foremost think tank in the area of biodiversity. Could you say a little bit more about your work there?
It was an incredible experience and something I am very proud of. And I'm very also proud of the people we have at A3 who made us, over a period of 15 years, one of the foremost institutes in India. And the reason for our success is, I think, our scientific rigor and our ability to take a multidimensional view of many of the issues that confront conservation community in the developing world. We have a very interdisciplinary group. We realize that there are, apart from very important ecological issues in conservation, there are social, political, and economic, and most importantly, human dimensions of conservation. And these issues must be addressed simultaneously if we are going to make any progress in conservation. And again, I think you raised the question of Norway spending a lot of money on rainforest. And I think these are really very laudatory efforts. And I think Norway is recognized all over the world in its ability, as well as in its commitment to conserve tropical biodiversity. But I also think that we need to, our approaches to conservation have to be more nuanced and not very simplistic.
I have noticed you have written in a paper I have found on the internet that one needs new institution, which I think is a dramatic statement, I call it, because we believe that we have the knowledge pyramid in our society today. We know how to gather all the knowledge we need, and we know how to do things and how to apply it, but apparently not, because you say we need new institutions about governance and about developing new leaders in the field and so forth. Could you comment on that?
Yes. I think, let me first very briefly explain why I made that statement or why I wrote that editorial in Science. I was more concerned about developing country institutions. And most of the developing country institutions have followed the model of institutions in the West. And institutions in the West were established in their own historical, political, and economic context. And institutions generally succeed when they take into account the local context. But in the tropics, especially at this time, we are facing huge problems, environmental problems and the problems of poverty. And I believe institutions in the developing world must address these two issues more or less simultaneously. Now, situation, for example, in Norway, it is very different because Norway has a very brief history of academic institutions. And many of the institutions, and especially here in Trondheim, your leading university, is one of the institutions which is set up very differently. It is addressing very, very relevant, very applied issues, apart from carrying on very fundamental work. Your own background, you are a physicist, and you have considerable interest in sustainability. All I am arguing for is a sort of a multidimensional view of the issues, and the institutions should be flexible. Many of the Norwegian institutions have shown flexibility, but unfortunately, in the developing country, many of the institutions are not showing that flexibility. Or for that matter, in America, where I am very familiar with the range of academic institutions, we are still stuck in the past. Institutions in the West lifted, the knowledge generated by these institutions in the West, lifted people out of poverty. But the world was very different at that time. In the West, for example, England, it had half the world's of resources available to it to lift its people out of poverty by the knowledge generated by its institutions. That is not currently the case.
Yesterday we had an interesting meeting with Innovation Norway, and I said to them that, in fact, you have made an innovation. The innovation is your new institution. So that is a kind of big compliment, I would say, that they realize that this is something new that should be, looked after. I think we both hope that Norway will play a good role in the future of your institution. Let me mention in this context that what a kind of idealist you are, Kamal Bawa. On receiving the award the other night from the stage, you said you will donate the prize to your institution, the A3 in India, which is highly unusual and very praiseworthy. But I would like now, just at the end, could you tell me a little bit about your background? Because we can all see you are Indian by birth, but you have had your career in the United States. Could you go back to India for a little moment and where you came from and so forth?
Well, I was born and raised in a small town in India and attended schools there and colleges, and I was not particularly a very bright student until I reached graduate school, where of course I won some prizes and then went on to do some field work in Eastern India as a part of my graduate program. And that's where I became very fascinated with biodiversity. And immediately after my doctorate, I left for the United States, and as not being a very bright student,
I don't believe that.
I never imagined that one day I will hold a very distinguished chair at one of the great American universities and go on to win several prizes and fellowships and some very prestigious funds, and then of course this Gunnerus Award in sustainability.
I would like to make a final comment that you have come a long way indeed, and you have contributed a lot, I would say, already to humanity, and we wish you further good luck with every achievement in the future. Thank you, Kamal Bawa.
Thank you very much.